Welcome to the Westminster tradition, where we are unpacking lessons for the public service, starting with the Robodebt Royal Commission. My name is Alison Lloyd-Wright. I'm a recovering public servant and a managing director of the Good Trouble Group. Joining me today on Kaurna land are my two fellow recovering public servants, Caroline Crozer-Barlow.
Hello, Alison.
And Danielle Elston of Good Government Advisory.
Hello, Alison.
So today we're kicking off a new mini-series on public sector recruitment, a topic that's really at the heart of how government functions and a topic that's come under scrutiny as part of ongoing reforms in the APS and the broader public service. Over the next few episodes, because we're not really quite sure how many there are going to be here, we're going to dive into the history, quirks and future of how we recruit and retain people in the public sector. We're not sure how many EPs, because now that we've, to use Danielle's terminology, picked at the scab of recruitment.
That was literally a listener comment, Alison. I was like inundated with this person who was like, I've got this to say and this to say. And they're like, you've really picked the recruitment scab here. I was like, okay, calm down. We can hear it all.
Well, we've realised there's like a lot more than we originally anticipated. So we'll see how long this one goes. But today we're going to start with the personal and the experience of applicants entering the public service. So we're going to share a little of our own journeys, hear from some of our listeners about theirs, and have some laughs and groans over truly bonkers job descriptions that still plague public sector hiring. So buckle up. Let's get started with our personal stories. Caroline and Danielle, what's going on with you in recruitment at the moment? Anything you want to share with us about how you entered the public service? How did you find yourself in it, Danielle?
I had to do it twice. Well, I didn't have to do it twice. I went in as a grad into the Commonwealth and I applied for all four, the four open grad programs, and I accepted the first one that I was offered because I didn't know when the others would get back to me. It was like 100 pages of questions. It was their first year of doing online applications. And so you had to fill out I reckon there was probably 20 selection criteria. I drafted them. I had an auntie who was a policy officer in the public service who was like, you don't say it like this, you say it like that. Then they flew us all to Melbourne for a group interview, which I remember being one of the most anxiety-ridden, because as if you're not worried enough about looking dumb to a panel, to look dumb to your competitors on top of a panel.
Surely worse.
Way worse.
So then there was online testing. So the process went for it was 7 months from applying to starting, but the process itself was 4 or 5 months kind of thing. So it was this incredibly long, the fact that you didn't lose interest is kind of amazing, and the fact that someone else was taking even longer than that 7 months, because after I'd started, DFAT were like, you've been successful, and I'm like, I work at Health now.
Can I just say that is completely my experience of all DFAT recruitment processes subsequent.
So I did that, and I only lasted kind of a year and a bit in the Commonwealth, and then I went and did other things in the for-purpose sector and had my own firm for a while. And I decided I wanted to come back into the state public service because I had a little kid and was travelling too much. So I open it up and there's, governance jobs and policy jobs and heads of comms jobs, and I'm applying at 5 or 6 different widths of classification, not getting interviews for the junior ones. There was just I could find no rhyme nor reason. The interviews were a catastrophic disaster, the first few. I remember going to one at a social policy area, and it was the principal or the manager of governance and a few other things. And their opening question was, how will you give good service to clients? And because I had been working for myself, clients were the people that were my clients. Mm-hmm. And then when I worked in the for-purpose sector, clients were your people who the community served. I just stood there like a complete stunned mullet going, what would the client, what client? Because the language had changed. That was not language that 10 years earlier had been how you describe things. So it was a very bumpy re-entry. I did 20 applications. I didn't get interviews for things that I still think probably would have been much more up my alley, and then did get them for other ones. And you got better at it because you started to learn. I got better at oh, right, okay, so there's all this new lingo. This is what business partnering means. and eventually got one in the justice portfolio. But the process was a complete nightmare. I applied for about 10 months and I had some shocking interviews because they were completely set up for people who were already kind of working there, and with commenting on documents that weren't publicly available, and you had to know all this stuff, and none of it was about your skills. Not one of it was like, what would you do if this came at you? What would you do with this? It was all, tell us a time when you rewrote the Form 1023BY. And I was like, I can't answer that. So it was a disaster. I did get back in, and I kept going back for feedback, and they'd say things like, the NGO sector is not relevant. Your Commonwealth job wasn't relevant. In fact, really, the only thing that's relevant is you've already done this job once before. Everything I had done for the last 13 years was considered completely not relevant by heaps of them. So it was neither of my entry stories were clean. They were put it all out there and hope someone sees value, and then not really ever being able to tell why some did and why some didn't.
Mine's pretty similar. So I came in through a graduate program, and I applied for 2 graduate programs in 2 different states and territories. One was resolved literally before the other one had even opened. So I had one offer, and then I waited 9 months for South Australia to get their act together.
I say.
But so similarly, easily 20 selection criteria, which you mentioned an auntie. I had some older friends who helped me work out what to write against each of those, which I don't think I would have been able to do on my own. And then turns out I made a terrible mistake, though. So I had the Victorian process had all been pretty smooth, group interviews, solo interviews, great, had an offer at DPC, thumbs up. But I did want to come back to South Australia, and there was a section at the end where it said, what type of work would you like to do in the South Australian Public Service as a graduate? And I wrote a very thoughtful and meaningful answer, I thought, about how I wanted to work on wicked policy problems and no, it turns out you were supposed to have typed the department you wanted to work in there. Because all those departments did then was just search Control F for where people had said, I really want to work at Treasury, or I really want to work at DPC.
Is this how you ended up at education?
No, I ended up at the Housing Trust. That was my graduate job.
God.
Yeah. I had to do a presentation in the interview as well. That was fun.
Yes, I had to do one of those too.
And although the interview and application process was difficult, my real gripe is actually with the graduate program. But we're going to have a whole other episode on graduate programs.
You and a lot of our listeners, Alison.
I lasted in my graduate position for 3 months before I applied for and moved into a different job. Caroline, you're not going to tell us about your experience. You're going to tell us about an amazing recruitment story that happened to you today.
Yeah, so mostly this is just an opportunity to whinge that someone who used to work for me is applying for a job, and they reached out and they said, do you mind being my ref? And I'm like, of course, love to do it. And then I got an email, which I have shared with you guys, and I probably can't post it because it's a bit, anyway, which is can you please answer, I kid you not, these 4 pages worth of selection criteria in relation to the person who's applying for your ref check. And I'm so cross about the whole thing, but in particular cross because, of course, I will go and do the bloody work of writing a job application for this poor person because actually they'd be really good at the job. But there's something so wacky about this process. She hasn't even had an interview yet. This is pre-interview ref check. This is just their sorting process. Anyway. End rant.
So, I think what this shows is there's a few peculiar things or specific things that are specific to public sector recruitment that maybe don't happen in other recruitment environments. But in particular, it can be really intimidating. It can be really varied from department to department and even division to division. And it's chock-a-block with jargon and process. But it seems to me that one of the kind of foundational pain points for both applicants and leaders, and we'll talk from a leader's perspective in a coming episode, is about the reliance on job descriptions and role classifications, all of which are kind of baked into the industrial relations system. And unlike in the private sector, these documents aren't just for guidance. They kind of underpin everything, from performance management to recruitment reviews. So what that means is if a job description is too specific, leaders can struggle to ask staff to take on alternative but related work. But equally, if it's too general, the roles become ambiguous and it's hard to hold anyone to account for not doing what you needed them to do. So we're going to unpack this a bit more. Public sector recruitment has been evolving for decades. Danielle, you've done some reading on the history. Learn us up.
Yeah, look, the thing that surprised me was I had assumed that the concept of merit, which is a concept that underpins most public sector, all public sector employment, I kind of assumed that had been around since some your oldie days,
the days of yore.
That's the word I was looking for.
You're looking for there, Dee.
Oh, such a long day. And it's not. So it was really actually, I mean, public services were very small, right? Like the government didn't run hospitals. So the Second World War really saw the massive expansion of Western government. And so instead of it being the person that you went to school with, or they started to realise that this needed to be publicly transparent and we needed a system to make sure that it wasn't an old boys club of recruitment. And so it was really not until the 70s that we started to formalise the idea that all roles needed to be recruited in a merit-based way. So the first thing I learnt was that's quite recent in the scheme of governance. And so I had assumed it was like a very long tradition, but it's not really. So the funny thing about it is that they set it up to deal with things that we are still grappling with today. So I'm not sure that it's worked. So 50 years ago, they were worried about the rigidity of recruitment criteria. They were worried about formal qualifications, ruling people out over practical skills. They were worried about limiting the opportunities for a broader talent pool, all of which our LinkedIn inbox is chock-a-block full of feedback on. So they created merit to solve problems that we are now bound by merit processes that cause the very same problems. So you get to now, and you get to reports from now states of the sector and all other sorts of reports, including the Thody review, and feedback from our listeners. All you keep seeing is references to overly bureaucratic, deterring talented candidates, people walking away before we finish recruitment. Thody specifically highlighted the complexity of selection criteria and the disconnect between the job ads and what the job is, what you do when you come to work. And so that it makes the recruitment completely inaccessible if you can't read between the lines. If you cannot translate from what it says to what you think it might mean, or you don't have inside track information that really it's a project job, it's not really a policy job, even though the word policy is littered all the way through it. And so we have been talking about this stuff since we found the solution to it. So we found the solution to all these problems in the 70s. We created merit-based recruitment. We created frameworks around them. We created commissioners' determinations around them, et cetera, and yet we seem to still be talking about the same thing every report has written since the Second World War.
And we're going to dive a bit more into merit in some future episodes, what it does mean and how we try and apply it. But let's pick up on one of those things, the job ads, Danielle. Let's talk about what's going on in government job advertising.
I spent time looking at job ads yesterday, and I was going to come up with something really snappy, and the problem is, like everything else in public sector recruitment, there's nothing snappy about it. So what I'm finding is that the job ads themselves, so I found classification, the low classified roles, so 50K a year, that were asking for extensive experience with high volume financial transactions and an innovative approach. I also found slabs and slabs of legislation in job ads and job
That's so weird.
and person specs.
What do you mean?
Yes.
Just like they've borrowed the language out of the ledge.
No, they've pasted it.
So, like, your job is to be the
like regulatory
enforcement
jobs
officer of
but see, you would think those would be the jobs that would have it, right? Sure, sheriff's officer.
Yeah.
All of those jobs in like a service centre or a fines recovery unit, it would be like to administer the act, and then it would paste out the sections that were about recovery. It would list the sections. And again, I am talking about jobs that pay 50, 55 grand a year.
That's insane.
Let's face it, legislators don't even make it practical for the application of the law by lawyers sometimes. But hiring people with legislation in your job ad or your job and person spec, like it's for service roles. It just has to go. Like I think you need to characterise that. That's what the training's for. You get the job and we will teach you that this is how we apply section such and such when we are handing out a driver's licence. I don't think we need to put them in the job. I think it would put off so many people.
And so that's the point, right? Job ads are supposed to be the first step in attracting the right talent and standing out in what is a truly competitive job market at the moment, tightest labour market in decades. So let's talk about some of the trends in public sector job advertising. Dee, I'm throwing to you first.
Oh, can I just go back a little bit on this? Because the thing about why we keep the job ads the way they are, like I'm just having that bodily experience of vacancy arises and I'm like, right, I really want to fill it and I want to do it really quickly. And so the first thing I need is a classified JMP. So I need a JMP that's already had, in South Australia we call it the Mercer, which is like it's had someone look at the duties that are in it and line it up
only for executive roles, but yeah.
Oh, but no, you also needed to get like your 7s and your 6s classed if you so whatever the process is. Like there's a process where someone has to classify the roles. And I've worked in agencies where we literally had like outsourced people who we would write job descriptions and then we'd send it to HR consultants outside and they would classify the role for us and then it would come back and then we'd be able to do it. And that was like 5 weeks of kind of faff, right? So of course you use the existing job description because why would I want to add 5 weeks to my process when I have suddenly got this thing that I need to do? So for me, it's like some of the rigidity is not actually an obligation. It's like a function of just being kind of efficient. So I don't know about you, but I would always like top and tail them. I'd be like, I'm going to put a sexy description in the what we do.
In the ad.
That's right.
But the job description remains terrible.
The duties remain the same. I'd cross out all of the mandatory quals requirements because we've discussed this. I have a real view about that. But apart from that, I'd be like, don't touch it so HR doesn't get cross at me so I can get this job out and advertised as soon as possible. So here's a given thought, and I know you've tried to do this in previous jobs, Danielle. How about we get some good pre-classified descriptions for all sorts of different roles and then we just get to use them when we come up with them. Instead what happens
Instead of bespoking every single job.
There's my offer of help on this one.
Look, we're already going all over the place, but the problem with some of that is what you end up doing is ending up with a list of like capabilities and then everyone applies for the jobs up against the same 9 things and learns how to talk to 9 things and you recruit in a single puddle, like is the other thing. So there is a con to every part of this is something that every time I come up with a solution, I'm like, that would be faster, but it would also be like this, or that would be better, but my God, that would take ages, or yeah.
But what's wrong with capabilities? Like, say a little bit more to me about why, because capabilities feels to me like the thing that gets you past the extensive experience working with legislative instruments and ministers' offices, which is how we narrow our pool of talent to the kind of existing 4 people who've done it. Like capabilities, which are ability to read and write and think strategically or whatever, like those are no?
Yeah, so I think there's normally a lot more of them is what I suppose I'm saying. And so, I mean, even in these other things, everything, there's all the work types, the Commonwealth has them, all jurisdictions have basically frameworks that drop out of what classifications, what kind of level that means and what capabilities they're going after. And I was talking to someone yesterday about how sometimes they are like really exclusive, like of neurodiversity, for instance. And we have to talk about like fit, cultural fit. And so sometimes if they're characteristics, not capabilities as well, you end up with lots of the same person. And yet some areas do want a disruptor, but that won't be on the list anywhere. And this is where it gets to what the trends are. So like everything sounds the freaking same, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone is going to lead a high-performing team.
It's so true. No one ever writes.
If only there were actually that many high-performing teams.
A basket of deplorables.
Everybody is delivering strategic outcomes. Now, I've had lots of jobs where I was not leading a high-performing team and I wasn't delivering a strategic outcome. I was just doing something.
Yeah. Important.
There's literally never any mention of inheriting projects that are mid-change or behind schedule. Like everybody is leading something awesome. And I'm like, if there were that many good jobs, we'd attract more people. And the thing is, when everything sounds like that, it all means nothing. No one believes a single word because it's like, well, everyone's leading high-performing teams, guys. Like, so that doesn't tell me anything at all.
Yeah, we really rarely talk about kind of cultural change or reform or struggling teams or systems that are in flux. But those are the exact kind of challenges we're looking to get candidates to solve.
Yeah. And there are some candidates who want a messy team, who love
I love a fixer-upper.
Fixer-upper.
Yeah.
The other one is the generic language. Everyone's driving innovation. Everyone's delivering impactful outcomes.
Oh, my God. Can we do an episode about innovation in the public sector?
Sure. Sounds really inspiring, but it's so vague. It's impossible to have the slightest idea what the actual work entails. And also, I love that this stuff is perhaps liked by senior leaders and even ministers who are not actually always looking for innovation at all. They want innovation in the job ad.
Yeah.
And they want to say we're doing innovation, but frequently they want safety. Innovation usually means ruffling someone's feathers and taking something from someone who was getting it before, and they don't want to do that. So
one of the things I've really noticed is like the way in which some titles mean the same thing but are wildly different. Like principal policy officer is the same as manager of projects or is the same as, and like you go through them and you're like, actually you're all doing the same thing. You're, I don't know, identifying a problem, working up a piece of legislation, getting it passed. Like that's both a project and a policy and a something else depending on kind of what agency you're in. And I think one of the challenges with that kind of, it sort of stops transferability. Like the number of people I know who are like, oh, I could never do policy. And you're like, dude, you've been doing policy. Like, literally that whole job was about what is the policy of how we deliver funding to blah or whatever. But also I think it makes you kind of, there's something about the way it kind of widgetizes what the skill sets are, whereas actually what I would be looking at is I'd be looking at the composition of the team that's there and I'd be like, we've already got a gun project manager and now we're advertising for another principal project role, whereas actually maybe what we want is the black hat or the, you know, the wacky innovator or the whatever. And so maybe I don't want to frame this as a project role. Maybe I want to frame this as a policy, whatever. Like I just feel like there's
so we look at each of them like one by one without kind of integrating them into the broader team and thinking about the balance.
Well,
that's
merit.
Almost not allowed. That's merit,
that's
right?
Merit so, is that.
Like, if we've determined that, like, a senior policy person needs to operate under these 10 capability frameworks or whatever the dot points are, but I actually really need a details person and someone who also pulls me down from my let's change this, let's do that, and I need someone who's like, these are great ideas, Danielle. Can I triage with you a couple of things? Now, if you are another one of me, we're going to burn the place down,
oh my God.
right?
I have such a good example of this. So when I was in defence, I worked on, I was like, I mean, you can imagine how sexy it is to work in international policy and defence. Like we were super sexy, awesome policy peeps. And I know a few of you listened, so shout out to the great team that we were there. But like, and we were on the Iraq desk during the Iraq war. So like really, really freaking sexy, right? And so you can imagine the sort of people who are doing principal policy roles in that kind of field. And then we had one guy who was an unusual fit in the principal policy role. I'm just going to say he was like a former lawyer and he was a very details person. And like, my first 6 months in the job was like, I do not know why this guy is here. He doesn't feel like a policy person to me. I'm just not sure what this is all about. Then we had to evacuate 500 odd locally engaged Iraqis from Iraq as part of our withdrawal. And it turns out that this guy's incredible detail orientation was really, really helpful when it came to compiling the epic amounts of paperwork required by our colleagues at Dimia, thanks Dimia, to get those people out. And it was one of those moments where I really realised that there's something just the arrogance of youth. I just thought because I was smart and could talk fast, I was the perfect policy officer. But I learned as well that actually it was pretty remarkable he was in the team. I don't know how he got through. He was not the standard person, but without him, we would have been fucked. So there you go.
That's a great example. My other pet peeve is requirements in job ads that aren't actually required. So we were talking about this before recording the episode. A good friend and listener who medically can't drive has had to take on a number of employers about requirements in job ads that the applicant possess a driver's licence, which Danielle countered with a further and better example of a requirement that a senior executive not only had to have a license, but they had to have the ability to change a tyre in a role that wasn't related to remote travel or community assistance. It was a purely administrative, office-based senior executive role.
I feel like this might make sense of an argument I had with my sister recently where I snapped at her, well, you don't know how to change a tyre. And she said very quickly, I do. And I thought, I don't think you do. But now I wonder if she's just been taught to lie about it through years of public sector application.
But also some of this stuff, right? Look at it this way. A ranger working in a remote area may need to change a tyre.
Definitely.
Because they may be on their own, right? So I also don't think it needs to be an ability in the role, because I think your legislated requirement would be that you would send them off to the dangerous driving course thing that I've sent people off to when they've had those types of jobs. And in those trainings, they learn how to manage in a remote situation when not just when they change a tyre, but when they blow a windscreen or whatever else. So, it's like every time we've come across something we wish that a person in a job had, we shove it into the job spec next time. And then the other thing we do is we put them in all the job specs. No.
Can I just talk to you on the first one though? Because I'm just going to say, if I accidentally won the role of ranger and you sent me on the dangerous driving course, I can tell you, no matter how much training you do, I would never be able to change that tyre because I have a particular kind of problem with being practical that I have learned to compensate for in a range of different ways. So you know how this has come about, right? Is that originally they would have been like, yeah, we'll send someone off on the course. And then they encounter someone like me who was just constitutionally incapable of doing anything without breaking stuff. Sorry about the pasta machine, Sam. Anyway, I'm just saying those things are in there for a reason. But I think it gets to your point, Danielle, that we struggle with our industrial, that's something you could catch in probation, for example. Yeah. But we're really bad at sort of saying in probation, actually, you haven't been able to pass this
that you
thing.
Could just problem solve your way out of, some of them, honestly.
Yeah, marry Sam.
My other one is so just the other one is some intra and interstate is there's just all these things we have put in all of them.
Yes, the travel one is really diminishing for single parents, for anyone with caring responsibilities.
And it's also the thing about it is you see that and you don't apply. For instance, if you have a small child and you don't have anyone else to look after them, and yet I have seen hundreds of jobs where that was in the job spec and that person, A, was never going to travel, and B, in the rare event someone needed to go to the thingamajiggy and the thingamajiggy, someone else in the team could have gone for them.
Exactly. This is what I mean, just problem solve your way out of it.
Don't make them requirements because people read them and they're like, well, I can't do that, so therefore I can't have this job.
So that brings us then to some listener stories, or at least one ripper listener story. Because we wanted this episode to focus on the experience of applicants, we put a call out on LinkedIn asking people to share their recruitment stories, and the response was overwhelming. Some consistent themes were around the process routinely taking 4 to 5 months. Leaders told us from their perspective it often took 8 months or more to fill positions. Countless stories of candidates who'd already moved on by the time the offers came through, meaning that the recruitment process was then unresolved. But this one really takes the cake, and we've decided that this story is so good that we're going to give out one highly coveted Westminster Tradition podcast mug. Danielle, kick us off.
Absolutely. And we only needed to do one because this one has it all. So it's quite long. Buckle up, listeners. So the process was pretty standard in some ways. Standard written application, cover letter and a CV, a timed written exercise completed online, writing a briefing for an executive based on a report provided within an hour, an online interview, not an in-person option, recruitment panel, 3 people, all in a room together, 3 questions, one about advice, one about stakeholders, something about cultural safety. Went for 30 minutes. They were clearly pushing people through like one after the other. The day after, the references get called, and the manager who got the reference call is effusive and said that the panel really liked this person and was a bit inappropriate, but they felt like it was all going very well. Things are looking good. The reference is very, very senior, so make sure that they're only being bothered if it looks like I'm actually going to get the job.
I mean, just to pause here, like at this point, if my refs have been called after the interview,
we're done,
I'm thinking,
right? Are we done?
We're on to a point of maybe there's a narrow second round, but we're kind of there. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Is that what you're thinking?
Oh, I was thinking we're basically done at this point.
Yeah.
No, guys, there's a bit more to go. We wait 2 weeks. Then then she receives a call asking her to come to a 1-hour group interview. Held off-site, not in a government office. Nothing to be prepared in advance.
A group interview.
Mm-hmm.
Intriguing.
Arrive for the group interview with 4 other applicants, and they're ushered into a room with a one-sided mirror. And we are seated at a big square table. So it's like Mad Men when they do the
focus groups.
Focus groups. Seated at a big square table, and the side in the mirror is kept free so the people on the other side can observe us better. Never told who is behind the mirror, except that there are people there from a significant agency watching us. Whiteboard, pen, Post-its and snacks, some policy documents. We are told we have all applied for roles at the same level, but there's multiple roles, and they're trying to see how people work together as peers. Like if you were managing a team, how would you go working as colleagues? They get a task to prepare a briefing for a senior person on a made-up scenario that has actually occurred in the team. There's been a concern raised by a board about how the team is participating in a program. So after an hour, the person from the panel returns to the room and we present back to them as a group about how we went. This person says, it was an experience. For context, the way I approached it was thinking they wanted to understand that I was a team player and not a dickhead. Excellent.
Yep.
Or whatever the technical term is for that. So I tried to listen to everyone's contribution, not speak over, the things you're taught to do and then I don't normally do when I'm supposed to do them. Bring them back when they were off track. Bit hard, bit impatient. This is a hard thing. You've also got people watching you.
This is like the worst group uni assignment dynamic ever.
And you're trying to perform teamwork, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to look smart and clever in your own right, but also not an asshole and very respectful and building on others' ideas. Ugh.
Oh my God. Just to say,
it would not be me in my natural.
This.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Totally.
Alison, on the other hand, I reckon could rock this.
I agree.
This is like your natural place. Yeah.
If anyone ever did Tournament of the Minds, they literally. Do you not remember? Anyway.
I do remember.
There's some performative teamwork involved.
Right. So again, she waits another 2 weeks. And at this point, she's starting to go, do I want this job? The group interview gave me vibes that maybe it's not the place for me and didn't think I'd nailed it. If this is what this is like it might not be the place for me. Then we're not done yet, guys. Invited to have a 30-minute coffee with the big boss. Coffee is nice, runs overtime. Again, all good signs. Talk about ourselves, how nice the team is to work in. I think things are going really well, she says. The vibes are great. And then at the 45-minute mark, the big boss says, so what did you think of the group interview process? And this is, of course, where I would come completely off the rails because we could tell you hated it. So she doesn't obviously have very good resting face. She's a bit thrown. So she comes back with like, I was a bit unsure because I've never done anything like that since I applied to be a checkout chick at Coles. So I was out of practice for this performative teamwork thing. But I appreciated that they were being innovative and trying to find good team fit and culture, because that's important to me too. And I was sorry if my discomfort was more obvious than I thought. So the boss says, yep, no worries. It was a pretty novel process that we're trying. They need to leave the coffee, but I should expect to get a call from the team at the final steps. I mean, how can there be any more steps?
Because at this point, she has spent 45 minutes with the big boss, half an hour in the panel meeting, an hour or whatever in the kind of group thing. So like 2.5 hours.
Plus the hour where she wrote a report.
Oh, yes,
wrote a
plus
briefing on the
3.5 hours. Yep. So we're at like 3.5 hours in kind of
So she leaves the coffee with the big boss.
I mean, in some cultures you're married at this point, right? Like this is like, you have really been in it.
And so the big boss says that they will get a call from the team about the final steps. How the hell they could make any more steps, I don't know. Guess what? She never, ever hears from them again.
Ghosted.
Not a text message, not a phone call, not a robo email spat out saying that, not progressed, but thank you for my application and good luck with your future. Nada, nothing, bugger all.
Oh, my God.
So, listener, you get the mug, because that cracks like all of my pet peeves. Took you God knows how many months, God knows how many hours. You had to do 25 awkward things. All of it was with a complete lack of clarity about what they were trying to find out about you, and then they ghosted you. You would have prepped for that coffee. You would have read up on this person. Like,
your current boss knows that you're in this process from 2 months ago because they called the ref
they got the ref check. Yeah.
So that boss is also still already starting to go, well, I'll have a vacancy. I better start doing my job spec now. Like, everybody's moved through the idea you've got this job. Nah. And not even that, just never hears from them again. Can I also say that needs to be in like a executive KPI performance review? If you run a process and someone doesn't get back to every applicant in a timely fashion, like, you should just be sacked. I just think it's so rude. I just think it's so bad that someone takes the time to apply to work for you. And again, I don't think it means that like the leader has to make phone calls to everyone who doesn't get it. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying this ghosting thing is happening more and more, and I honestly feel like it's a sackable offence in my book.
No, but as increasingly both you use, as people are using recruiters more for senior roles, but also using contractors like labour hire firms for kind of bringing in junior roles. Like, I really feel like there's a kind of like, oh, well, I wasn't in charge of the process. Why do I have to kind of tidy up the kind of mess of the end? So there is a real problem there.
Feel we recruit like it's still a recession, like it's not. Job seekers have more power in the dynamic and more opportunities than ever. It's the tightest labour market in decades. Like, how can you expect to get quality candidates when you treat them this way? Anyway.
Well, that's one of the things I like about the story, though, is actually you do learn something about what the organisation values through it, right? Like, they value teamwork, but also they don't value efficiency, right? Like, it's both of those things. And like, I think actually it's a terrible story because no one finds out at the end. But actually there's something about the whole package where I'm like, maybe they got exactly the right candidates they were looking for there, because they didn't want, the super assertive, aggressive, like people who were they wanted people who were
Look, there is something in what it exposes to you as a candidate about whether or not you'd actually like to work there, which clearly this person kind of realised partway through.
Can I say I know someone who walked out of an interview?
I
think both parties, right? This is my radical idea. Both the interviewers and the interviewee should get like an X Factor style button that at any point they can just be like, do you know what? This isn't happening. Doesn't work for me. Doesn't work for you.
We'll do this in future episodes, but you're also talking about those moments where you're one question in, Nick's clear the candidate no longer wants the job and doesn't know what's going on, and you don't either, and it's like you have to still sit there
for another 45 minutes.
Like while they're borderline crying and you're like,
oh God.
why
and
are
you've
we
got
doing
that
this?
rigid smile on your face as the interviewer where you're desperately trying to encourage them.
Danielle and I are both doing the interviewer face.
You are doing it beautifully
The
right now.
encouraging smile nod.
You're
Come
okay.
on.
You're okay.
You're
it's
okay.
okay.
You're safe.
You
I'm
come
not a
out
bear.
with sore cheeks and like a hard neck from all the nodding. Yeah.
But equally, I've been a candidate where just based on the kind of, I don't know, attitude of the interviewers and the types of things they were asking, I just thought, this is not for me. Anyway, that's all we've got time for today. We are going to dive into the concept of merit and recruitment from a leadership perspective, so what it looks like from the other side of the table in a coming episodes, and how we try and overcome some of the challenges around talent management ideas from the private sector in a system that inherently is built differently and values different things. And before there's an outcry about how we haven't done recruitment agencies or interview questions with 7 parts, don't panic. There's so many more episodes coming on recruitment. Until then, please keep your stories coming, particularly if you want to be in the running to win a mug. You can find us on LinkedIn or email us at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Till next time.
Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions, or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.